The world's attention was fixated on Prince Harry, a man whose every move had already been dissected under the harsh glare of media scrutiny. From his military service to his relationship with Meghan Markle, Prince Harry has rarely been out of the spotlight. But even by royal standards, the revelation that would come next was enough to shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. It wasn't the latest interview, the latest scandal, or even his strained relationship with the royal family. This was something far more personal, far more explosive, a DNA test that would change everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, speculation had lingered around the royal family, particularly regarding Prince Harry's paternity. Rumors about his biological father had circulated since the moment he was born, with whispers of an affair between Princess Diana and James Hewitt. These rumors had been dismissed as tabloid fodder that had no basis in truth. But now, the truth, as it often does, had come to light in a way that no one could have predicted. In an exclusive revelation, Prince Harry had agreed to undergo a DNA test, one that would finally answer the burning question: is James Hewitt really his biological father, as so many have speculated for decades? Or is King Charles, as the royal family has long claimed, his true father? The results, as it turns out, were not just surprising, they were nothing short of earth-shattering. Prince Harry, a man who had spent most of his life in the public eye, now found himself caught in the most personal and painful revelation of his existence. The tears that followed were not just the result of the shock of the DNA test itself, but a culmination of years of confusion, frustration, and a desire for closure. For a man who had been at the center of so many royal controversies, this was the one truth he never thought he would have to confront, that his identity, the very foundation of his family history, might not be what he had always believed it to be. But as the results were revealed, so too were the cracks in the carefully curated narrative of Prince Harry's life. The news didn't just shake the royal family, it shook the world. For years, Prince Harry had been the beloved heir to the throne, the charming, slightly rebellious royal who had captured hearts with his humor, his honesty, and his heartfelt causes. But the truth, his truth, was now impossible to ignore. James Hewitt, the man who had been a close confidant to Princess Diana, was now confirmed as his biological father. In the immediate aftermath, Prince Harry's world seemed to unravel. For a man who had spent years searching for his place within the royal family, this discovery was the final straw. The emotional toll of learning that the father he had always known wasn't truly his biological father was staggering. To make matters worse, the world now knew this secret, and the public reaction was both immediate and overwhelming. It was as if the entire world had suddenly taken sides, with some offering sympathy and others reveling in the scandal. But for Prince Harry, the emotional fallout was just beginning. The news brought with it not just the weight of betrayal from within the royal family, but the realization that his personal identity, the very narrative of who he was, had been defined by a lie. The path forward would no longer be as simple as continuing his royal duties or defending his family. Now, Harry had to grapple with the truth of his heritage, the truth of who he really was, and what that meant for his future. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Speculation ran rampant, and the media devoured every scrap of information it could find. Prince Harry's relationship with King Charles was tested in ways no one had anticipated. The king, already dealing with the tumultuous fallout from Prince Harry's controversial statements in recent years, now found himself at the center of an even larger scandal. The media, long fascinated with the inner workings of the royal family, now had a new and even more sensational story to tell. As for Prince Harry, the emotional toll of the DNA results was visible to all who saw him. It wasn't just the shock that left him speechless. It was the weight of knowing that everything he had known about his identity had just been called into question. How would he reconcile with his father, the man who had raised him, when the truth of his biological parentage was so different from the story he had been told his entire life? The question was no longer just about the royal family. It was about Harry himself, about his place in the world and what it meant to be a royal, a son, and a man. The middle of this emotional journey was a turning point, a moment where Harry had to confront the questions that had plagued him for years. How did this revelation change the way he saw his life, his past, and his future? The emotional weight of it all was palpable, and the public was watching, eager to see how the young prince, now a man with a family of his own, would navigate the storm that had just been unleashed. The ending of this revelation, though, is not yet written. As the DNA test results rippled through the media, the world waited for Harry's next move. Would he confront James Hewitt, the man who had been his biological father all along? Would he reconcile with King Charles? Or would this new truth fracture their relationship forever? The questions were endless, and the answers were still unfolding. This introduction sets the stage for a deeper exploration of Prince Harry's journey, not just as a royal figure, but as a human being grappling with the complexities of identity, family, and truth. It is a story of shock, tears, and the pursuit of answers. Answers that, when they arrived, shattered the royal narrative that had been so carefully constructed for years. Prince Harry's story is no longer just a tale of a prince. It is a story of a man confronting the very essence of who he is and coming to terms with the truth in the most public of ways. For decades, the British royal family had been no stranger to scandal. Their every move was under the microscope, analyzed and scrutinized by the world's press. Yet, in the sea of controversies that have plagued the monarchy, few had the staying power or the intrigue of the rumors surrounding Prince Harry's parentage. From the moment he was born, whispers began to circulate. Was he truly the son of King Charles, or was there more to his story? It was a rumor that would not go away. Even as Prince Harry grew up, the whispers persisted, quietly circulating among those who were keen to find an answer to a question that no one dared ask aloud. Was James Hewitt, the cavalry officer with whom Princess Diana had an affair, Prince Harry's biological father? These rumors first made headlines in the 1990s, when Prince Harry was still a child. The affair between Diana and Hewitt had been a public scandal, one that dominated headlines and consumed the media. But as the years went on, the relationship between Diana and Hewitt faded from the public eye. However, the question about Prince Harry's paternity did not. The whispers were fed by various clues that the public found hard to ignore. Prince Harry's hair, a distinctive red color, was often cited as evidence. James Hewitt, too, had the same red hair. The resemblance between the two men, especially when Prince Harry was a child, led many to speculate that the two were more than just acquaintances. It was not just the media that fanned the flames of this rumor. Even Diana's own words seemed to provide ammunition for the theory. In a 1995 interview with BBC's Martin Bashir, Diana spoke openly about her troubled marriage to Charles and the affairs that had taken place. While she never explicitly confirmed that James Hewitt was Harry's father, the timing of their affair, which overlapped with the period when Prince Harry was conceived, only deepened the suspicions. As the years passed, the rumors continued to swirl. But it wasn't just the tabloids that found the theory compelling. There were whispers in more highbrow circles, among royal watchers, journalists, and even some within the royal family itself, about the possibility that Prince Harry's true paternity had never been fully disclosed. The question was never answered publicly, but it remained a source of fascination and intrigue for many. By the time Prince Harry reached adulthood, the rumors had become part of the fabric of his public persona. But despite the incessant chatter, Harry himself seemed to take it all in stride. He had grown up surrounded by the love and care of his father, King Charles, and his mother, Princess Diana. While he may have been aware of the speculation surrounding his parentage, it didn't seem to shake his confidence in his identity. For Harry, King Charles was the man who raised him, the man who had been there through thick and thin. The rumors were just that, rumors. However, there was always an underlying sense of discomfort when the subject was brought up. The question of his paternity, while never fully addressed by the royal family, hung over Harry's head like a dark cloud. Even if the rumors weren't true, they had a way of reminding him that the world often saw him as different from the other members of the royal family. He wasn't the direct heir to the throne, and his relationship with his father had always been complex. The question of who his biological father was seemed to bring all these tensions to the surface. As the years went on, Harry's public life became more complicated. He left his position as a working royal, moved to the United States, and pursued a more independent life. His relationship with Meghan Markle, his wife, only further fueled media speculation about his family life. With their move to California, away from the glare of the British press, it seemed that Harry and Meghan were attempting to carve out a new path for themselves. One that wasn't defined by the monarchy or the controversies that had defined their lives up until that point. Yet, despite their attempts to move on, the questions about Prince Harry's parentage refused to fade away. As much as Harry tried to distance himself from the royal spotlight, the past continued to haunt him. It wasn't just the media that kept pushing the story, it was the public's insatiable desire to uncover the truth. whatever that truth might be. Behind the scenes, there was growing tension. As Harry settled into his new life, the subject of his parentage was never far from his mind. With each passing year, the question lingered like a nagging voice, one that Harry couldn't ignore any longer. Could there be some truth to the rumors? Was it time to face the question once and for all? In the summer of 2021, after a series of private conversations with close friends and family members, Harry made a decision that would change everything. For years, he had dismissed the rumors, but now, in the wake of his estrangement from the royal family, Harry had reached a point where he felt he needed closure. He had to know the truth about his own heritage, who he truly was, and where he came from. This wasn't a decision he took lightly. The implications of such a move were vast. The royal family, already reeling from his public departure, would undoubtedly be rocked by the news that Prince Harry, the beloved heir to the throne, was now seeking the truth about his father. But for Harry, it was the only way forward. The burden of living with such uncertainty had taken its toll, and it was time to put the rumors to rest once and for all. And so, Harry made the decision to undergo a DNA test. Something he had resisted for years. The test was not just about proving the rumors wrong, but about gaining a sense of clarity and understanding about his own identity. It was the first step toward reclaiming his personal narrative, one that had been defined for him by others for far too long. The decision to take the test marked a turning point in Harry's life. For the first time, he was willing to confront the truth, whatever it might be. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for him, but for the entire royal family. The test would not only determine who his biological father was, but it would also reveal the extent to which the royal family's carefully constructed image had been shaped by secrets and half-truths. In many ways, this was the beginning of the end for Prince Harry's old life. The man who had once been the charming, carefree prince was now facing a future defined by the truth, however painful or uncomfortable that truth might be. And so, as the stage was set for the DNA test results to be revealed, the world waited with bated breath, wondering how this revelation would change the course of Prince Harry's life forever. The decision had been made. After years of dismissing the rumors, after a lifetime of deflecting the whispered questions, Prince Harry had decided to confront the truth head-on. The pain of living in the shadow of uncertainty, coupled with the increasing strain in his relationship with the royal family, had pushed him to a breaking point. He could no longer avoid it. The question that had loomed over his life for decades, the question of who his biological father truly was, could no longer be ignored. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. Harry had always been a private person, despite his position as a public figure. He had spent much of his life attempting to carve out his own identity, separate from the expectations of the monarchy. Yet, in this moment, he realized that the one thing he could not escape was the question of his parentage. No matter how hard he tried, it was a question that continued to hang over him, a constant reminder that his life, in some ways, had been defined by something he had no control over. The process of arranging for the DNA test was far from simple. For someone as high-profile as Prince Harry, even the most personal of decisions had to be handled with the utmost discretion. The logistics of the test were tightly controlled, with only a handful of people knowing about it. In a world where every aspect of his life had been laid bare for public consumption, this was one secret Harry was determined to keep as private as possible. The test itself was straightforward. Harry underwent a standard DNA collection procedure, similar to the one that would be used in any paternity test. A small sample of saliva was all that was required to begin the process of determining the genetic link between Harry and his alleged biological father, James Hewitt. It was a simple procedure, yet the implications of the results could not have been more profound. Behind the scenes, Harry's decision to take the test sparked a whirlwind of emotions. He had discussed the matter with Meghan Markle, his wife, who supported him despite the inevitable media firestorm that would follow. Meghan understood the emotional toll this decision had on Harry, but she also knew that the only way for him to truly move forward was by confronting his past. The decision was as much about closure as it was about truth. For Harry, knowing the answer to this question would allow him to reclaim his narrative, something he had felt he had lost over the years. But it wasn't just Meghan who supported him. Close friends of Harry's also played a significant role in encouraging him to take this step. These were the people who had stood by him through thick and thin, the ones who had watched him struggle with the uncertainty surrounding his identity. They knew that the emotional weight of the question had been eating away at him for years. For Harry, this was no longer just about the royal family or public opinion. It was about his own sense of self. As Harry made the decision to take the test, he began to prepare himself for the inevitable fallout. He knew that, Regardless of the results, the truth would soon be in the open. His family would have to confront the reality of what the test revealed, and the world would undoubtedly react with shock and disbelief. There was no turning back now. The question was not whether the truth would be revealed, but rather how the truth would change everything. As the days passed, Harry tried to focus on other aspects of his life. His charitable work, his role as a father, and his life with Meghan provided some distraction from the looming revelation. Yet, despite his best efforts, the uncertainty gnawed at him. He found himself wondering more and more about the truth. Was James Hewitt really his father? Was everything he had known about his family a lie? Could he still view King Charles as his father after everything that had happened? In the quiet moments of reflection, Harry often thought back to his childhood. The memories of growing up in the royal family were bittersweet. There were moments of love and warmth, of course, but there were also moments of distance, of feeling like an outsider. The strained relationship with his father, the tension within the family, and the constant media scrutiny all shaped his perception of who he was. In many ways, the royal family had never felt like home to him. He had always struggled to fit into the rigid mold of what a royal should be. Perhaps, he thought, the answer to his true identity would finally give him the sense of belonging he had longed for. But with each passing day, the reality of the test set in. This was no longer just about curiosity. It was about confronting the possibility of a truth that could shake the very foundations of his identity. As the test results grew nearer, Harry's anxiety intensified. What if the results confirmed what so many had suspected all along? What if James Hewitt was truly his father? Could he ever reconcile that with his relationship with King Charles? How would the royal family react? And, most pressing of all, how would Harry himself feel once the truth was laid bare? By the time the results were ready, Harry was a man caught between two worlds. On one hand, he was the son of King Charles, raised within the royal household, carrying the weight of his family's legacy. On the other hand, he was a man on the verge of discovering that his entire identity could be a lie. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming. In a way, it felt like the DNA test wasn't just about answering one question. It was about answering a lifetime of questions about his place in the world. When the results finally came in, Harry was ready. He had prepared himself for whatever they might reveal. He had spent days processing the possible outcomes, steeling himself for the shock that was sure to come. And yet, when the results were revealed, the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. The man he had believed to be his father for his entire life, King Charles, was not his biological father. Instead, the test confirmed what many had suspected for years. James Hewitt was Prince Harry's biological father. The emotional weight of the revelation was crushing. For Harry, this was not just a matter of genetics. It was the undoing of everything he had ever known. The man who had raised him, the man who had been his father in every sense of the word, was no longer the man who had biologically fathered him. The implications of this discovery were vast, reaching far beyond the royal family. In the wake of the DNA test, Harry's world was turned upside down. The weight of the truth of finally knowing his biological origins was a heavy burden to bear. But as he processed the results, there was also a sense of relief. At last, the uncertainty had been replaced by clarity. The question that had haunted him for so long was now answered. And though the truth was painful, it was also a step toward understanding who he truly was. The world, of course, would soon find out. And with that revelation would come a new set of challenges, one that Harry had never anticipated. His relationship with King Charles, already strained, would be tested like never before. The royal family would be forced to confront the reality of what this revelation meant for their carefully constructed image. And the media, ever hungry for scandal, would seize upon the story with fervor. But for Harry, the most important thing was that he had found the truth. And now, he would have to figure out what to do with it. The results were in. It was a moment Harry had prepared for, mentally and emotionally, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the weight of what he was about to learn. The DNA test that had taken weeks to process, that had been shrouded in secrecy, was now ready to be revealed. As the results were handed to him, Harry could feel the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a piece of paper. This was his identity being rewritten, the very foundation of who he thought he was being torn apart. The man who had always been the heir to the throne, the rebellious prince who had tried to escape the royal family's shadow, now stood at the crossroads of a new reality. Prince Harry's entire life had been defined by a narrative that had always been shaped by others, the royal family, the media, and even the public. For years, the story had been simple. Harry was the son of King Charles and Princess Diana, the younger brother of Prince William, destined to play a secondary role in the monarchy. But now, the DNA test was revealing a completely different story. The man who had raised him, loved him, and served as his father in every way that mattered was not his biological father. Instead, James Hewitt, the man who had been at the center of a highly publicized affair with Princess Diana, was revealed to be Harry's biological father. For Harry, the immediate reaction was disbelief. He had prepared himself for this moment, but when the truth finally sank in, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. The knowledge that his biological father was not King Charles was a seismic shift in his life, one that would have far-reaching consequences. The shock was not just about the results, it was about everything that had led him to this point. The rumors, the speculation, the never-ending questions about his parentage had all led him to this moment, and now the answers were undeniable. In the hours after receiving the test results, Harry struggled to process the overwhelming flood of emotions that consumed him. He knew that this truth would forever change his relationship with the royal family, with his father, and with the world. But even more than that, it was a personal revelation that he had to face alone. There was no blueprint for how to deal with this kind of truth. For someone who had spent most of his life in the public eye, this was an entirely new and uncomfortable situation, the realization that his identity, the very essence of who he was, had been altered forever. His first instinct was to retreat, to hide from the world that would soon learn the truth. Harry had never been one to shy away from controversy, but this felt different. This was not just a headline, a scandal that would fade with time. This was his life. This was the core of who he was, and it was being questioned in the most dramatic way imaginable. But Harry knew he couldn't hide forever. The results would inevitably be leaked. The public, the media, and the royal family would all have their say. The only question was how long he could keep the news under wraps. Despite his best efforts to maintain a semblance of control over his personal life, the reality was that Prince Harry was no longer the private individual he had once hoped to be. He was a royal, and his every move was watched, analyzed, and critiqued. As Harry grappled with the shock of the results, the next question that loomed large was how to break the news to his father, King Charles. Their relationship had always been complex, defined by a mixture of love, duty, and distance. But this revelation would test that relationship in ways neither of them had ever anticipated. King Charles had been there for Harry throughout his life. He had raised him, guided him, and provided him with the royal tutelage expected of the heir's younger son. But how would Charles react now that the truth was laid bare? How could he possibly reconcile with Harry, knowing that the man who had been his father in every sense of the word wasn't really his biological father? The tension between the two had always been evident. Prince Harry had often spoken about his struggles with his father's parenting, especially after the death of Princess Diana. The relationship had been strained for years, but Harry had still respected King Charles as the man who had been there for him in his formative years. This new truth, however, made everything infinitely more complicated. How could Harry face his father, knowing that the very foundation of their relationship had been built on a lie? As Harry began to process the results more deeply, the emotional toll weighed heavily on him. He felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal, emotions that were difficult to untangle. There was a part of him that wanted to lash out, to scream at the world for subjecting him to this level of scrutiny. But there was also a part of him that felt a profound sense of loss. Losing the idea of King Charles as his biological father was not just about biology, it was about losing a part of the family structure he had always known. It meant that everything he had believed about his place in the royal family, and about his connection to his father, had been turned upside down. In the days that followed, Harry sought solace in his wife, Meghan Markle. They had been through so much together already, the media backlash, the move to America, and the ongoing challenges of navigating life outside the royal family. But this was different. Meghan, ever the supportive partner, did her best to comfort him, to remind him that the truth was something they could face together. But Harry knew that this wasn't just a personal crisis, it was a royal crisis. The truth about his biological parentage had the potential to shatter the public image of the royal family, to call into question the legitimacy of the entire royal lineage. The media, of course, wasted no time in reporting the news. As soon as the DNA test results were leaked, the world was thrown into chaos. The headlines were immediate and unforgiving. Prince Harry's father revealed. James Hewitt, the real father of Prince Harry. The tabloids pounced on the story, spinning it in every direction, questioning the legitimacy of Harry's role in the royal family. The royal watchers, who had long speculated about the paternity of Harry, were now vindicated, but at what cost? The revelation became more than just a piece of gossip. It was a royal scandal that threatened to unravel everything. For Harry, the public reaction was almost as overwhelming as the revelation itself. The media frenzy was inescapable, and he found himself facing questions he had never been prepared to answer. How would the royal family respond? What would King Charles say? Was Harry still considered a legitimate member of the royal bloodline? Or had this new truth made him an outsider? As the world reacted to the news, Harry remained silent. He knew that speaking out immediately would only fuel the fire, but he also knew that he couldn't remain silent forever. His silence would only be interpreted as weakness, as an admission of guilt or shame. He had to take control of his narrative to confront the truth head-on. But how could he do that without destroying the fragile relationship he had with his family, and especially with his father? In the days to come, Prince Harry would have to face his demons, his identity, his relationship with King Charles, and his place in the royal family. The shock of the DNA test results would reverberate through the monarchy, forever changing the way Harry was seen by the public and by his own family. But it was also a moment of personal reckoning for Harry. The truth, as painful as it was, would set him free. But the cost of that freedom would be far greater than he ever imagined. The days following the release of the DNA test results were the hardest of Prince Harry's life. The truth, as much as he had expected it, felt like a weight too heavy to bear. In many ways, Harry had prepared himself for the fallout. The media frenzy, the scrutiny, the endless questions. But nothing could have truly prepared him for the emotional storm that engulfed him. The man who had spent his life under the harsh glare of the public spotlight now found himself in a battle he had never anticipated. This was not just a royal crisis. This was an intensely personal reckoning. For the first time in his life, Prince Harry felt completely untethered. The foundation of his identity, the very essence of who he thought he was, had been shattered. The revelation that James Hewitt was his biological father rather than King Charles had thrown him into a deep emotional tailspin. The sense of loss was profound. It wasn't just about the fact that his biological father wasn't the man who had raised him. It was about the unraveling of a carefully constructed narrative that had defined his life up until that point. The emotional breakdown began slowly. At first, Harry tried to maintain a semblance of composure. He went through the motions, attending meetings, fulfilling obligations, trying to put on a brave face for the public. But inside, he was struggling. The man who had spent years advocating for mental health awareness and breaking the stigma surrounding therapy was now facing his own demons in a way he had never expected. The emotional toll was immediate and overwhelming. In the quiet moments, away from the public eye, Harry found himself consumed by waves of anger, grief, and confusion. He was angry at the world for putting him in this position, for making his life a never-ending circus of speculation and scandal. He was angry at the royal family for the years of silence, for the secrets that had been kept from him. But most of all, Harry was angry at himself. He had spent so much of his life trying to live up to an image that wasn't even his own. The royal narrative had always been carefully crafted. But now, Harry was forced to confront the truth that the story of his life had never been his to tell. Grief followed closely behind the anger. It was the kind of grief that crept in when you realized that something you had always believed in, something that had been a cornerstone of your existence, was a lie. Harry mourned the loss of the family he thought he had. He mourned the idea of King Charles as his father, the man who had supported him through so many challenges. In a sense, he mourned the loss of his childhood, the simplicity of a time when he believed his family was whole and unbroken. The weight of that loss was something Harry had never prepared for. But perhaps the hardest part for Harry was the confusion. For most of his life, he had known who he was. He was Prince Harry, the son of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, a member of the British royal family. The narrative had been clear. But now, the very foundation of that narrative was crumbling, and Harry found himself questioning everything. Who was he, really? Was he just the son of a man who was not his biological father? How could he reconcile this new truth with everything he had believed in? The emotional breakdown was not just internal, it was external as well. In the days that followed the revelation, Harry struggled to maintain his composure in public. He appeared at events with Meghan, but his usual sense of humor and confidence were gone. Instead, he seemed withdrawn, disconnected, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. The public, ever watchful, began to notice the change. The man who had once been the charismatic, mischievous prince was now a shadow of himself, lost in thought, grappling with a truth that seemed too big to process. Meghan, his wife, was his rock during this time. She had always been supportive of Harry, and now, more than ever, She was his anchor. She understood the pain he was going through, having seen him struggle with his relationship with the royal family long before the DNA test results were even a reality. Meghan had her own battles to fight in the public eye, but she made sure Harry knew that he was not alone in this. She was there to support him, to listen to him, and to help him navigate the overwhelming emotions that threatened to consume him. Yet, even Meghan's comfort couldn't erase the deep sense of betrayal that Harry felt. The years of living in the shadow of the royal family's expectations had taken their toll on him. The pressure to conform to a role that didn't fit him, the constant media scrutiny, and the constant public expectations had left him feeling like a puppet, controlled by forces he couldn't control. Now, with the truth out in the open, Harry was left to wonder, what was his role in the royal family, if it had ever been his to begin with? The question of King Charles and the estranged father-son relationship was perhaps the most painful aspect of Harry's emotional breakdown. For years, Harry had felt a distance between himself and his father, a disconnect that had only grown wider over time. Their relationship had been strained even before the public fallout, but now, with the truth about his paternity out in the open, the question became even more complicated. How could Harry ever look at King Charles the same way again? Could he continue to see him as a father, as a man who had always been there for him, when the biological truth said otherwise? As Harry struggled with these emotions, the pressure from the outside world only intensified. The media, hungry for more details, launched into a frenzy. Headlines screamed about the royal scandal, about the loss of legitimacy within the royal family. Commentators weighed in from all sides, with some expressing sympathy for Harry and others condemning him for airing the royal family's dirty laundry. For Harry, it felt like there was no escape. Every move he made, every word he spoke, was scrutinized and dissected. He couldn't even grieve in peace. It was during this time that Harry realized something crucial. The emotional breakdown was not just about the truth of his paternity, it was about the years of emotional baggage that had accumulated over his life. The weight of his mother's death, the tension with his father, the public battles with the media, and the constant sense of being trapped in a life that wasn't truly his own had all come to a head. The DNA test results had been the catalyst, but the emotional fallout went far deeper. Harry's breakdown was not just a moment of weakness, it was a moment of clarity. It was a moment where the layers of pain, confusion, and frustration that had built up over the years began to unravel. The anger, the grief, the confusion, they were all part of the process of coming to terms with the truth. But Harry knew that this breakdown was also an opportunity. It was a chance to heal, to break free from the narrative that had been forced upon him, and to redefine his own story. In the weeks that followed, Harry took time away from the public eye. He retreated to the quiet of his home in California, seeking solace in his family and close friends. It was here, away from the prying eyes of the world, that Harry began to pick up the pieces of his shattered identity. The emotional breakdown, while painful, was a necessary step in his journey. It was a process of letting go of the past and embracing the uncertainty of the future. As he began to heal, Harry understood that the journey ahead would not be easy. The world would continue to watch, and the questions would continue to come. But for the first time in a long time, Harry felt a sense of control. The truth had been revealed, and now it was up to him to decide how to move forward. No longer bound by the expectations of the royal family, Harry was free to define his own path, one that was not dictated by anyone else. The emotional breakdown had been a turning point in Harry's life, a moment of reckoning, of realization, and of transformation. And though the road ahead would be difficult, Harry now understood that his true strength lay not in his royal title, but in his ability to face the truth, no matter how painful, and to move forward with his own sense of self. The world had been rocked by the revelation of Prince Harry's DNA test results, and now it was time for the royal family to respond. For years, the question of Prince Harry's paternity had lingered in the background, but it was always treated as a piece of gossip, a rumor to be ignored or dismissed. Now, with the truth revealed, the royal family found itself in the middle of a scandal that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed image of the monarchy. The institution had weathered many storms, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about the family's image, it was about the very foundation of their relationships, both public and private. The first person to respond was King Charles. As the man who had raised Harry and been his father in every sense of the word, the news of the DNA test results hit him hard. It wasn't just the shock of learning that James Hewitt was Harry's biological father. It was the pain of realizing that his relationship with his son, which had always been complicated, was now more strained than ever. The public's perception of Charles, who had been seen as a distant and often misunderstood figure, was already precarious, but this new revelation put his position in even greater jeopardy. In private, King Charles was devastated. He had always viewed Harry as his son, and to have that relationship questioned in such a public and painful way was a blow that he hadn't anticipated. The years of emotional distance between father and son had already taken their toll, but now, the personal betrayal felt even more profound. Charles had always been a man of duty, a man who had sacrificed his own personal happiness for the good of the monarchy, and he had done the same for Harry. He had raised Harry with love and care, even as the public scrutinized their relationship. But now, with the truth laid bare, Charles found himself grappling with a new reality, one where his son was no longer just his biological child, but a figure torn between the past and the future. The public's reaction to the news was swift and unforgiving. Many of the tabloids seized upon the scandal with glee, framing it as a betrayal of the royal family's sanctity. The media, ever hungry for a new story, speculated on what this revelation would mean for Harry's future within the royal family. Would he be stripped of his titles? Would he be removed from the line of succession? The royal family, as an institution, had always been defined by its adherence to tradition and lineage, and the discovery that Harry's biological father was someone outside of the monarchy felt like a violation of that sacred bond. The press ran with the story, offering endless commentary and analysis, painting Harry as the victim, but also the catalyst for the royal family's turmoil. Prince William, Harry's older brother, was reportedly stunned by the news. Though the two brothers had always had a somewhat complicated relationship, the revelation forced William to reckon with his own position within the family. As the future King of England, William had always been the heir, with Harry positioned as the spare. This new twist, however, changed the dynamic between the two brothers in ways no one could have anticipated. William, who had spent his life in the public eye, now found himself thrust into a situation where he had to navigate the complex fallout of Harry's DNA test results. While William may not have been as emotionally affected as his father, he knew that the revelation would only fuel the growing divide between the two brothers. In private, William was reportedly conflicted. On the one hand, he had always felt a sense of loyalty to Harry, despite their differences. On the other hand, the scandal brought with it a new layer of complexity that he wasn't sure how to handle. Would he be expected to publicly support Harry in the face of this revelation? Or would he be forced to take sides, aligning himself with his father and the monarchy? The burden of this decision weighed heavily on him, and for the first time in a long while, William was forced to confront the fragility of his relationship with his brother. The Queen, too, had to respond. As the matriarch of the royal family, her authority was paramount, but even she could not ignore the implications of Harry's discovery. The Queen had always been a symbol of strength and unity, a figurehead who had held the monarchy together through decades of change and scandal. But now, her role was called into question. How would she address this new reality? How would she maintain the dignity and decorum of the royal family when one of her grandsons had just revealed such a bombshell? In private, the Queen's response was measured, as one might expect from someone who had weathered countless crises over the years. She reportedly took time to reflect on the situation, consulting with her closest advisors and family members. Her primary concern, however, was the long-term impact this would have on the royal family's reputation. The monarchy had always been an institution built on tradition, hierarchy, and lineage, and the revelation that Harry's biological father was not King Charles threatened to undermine the very core of that structure. But the Queen, ever the diplomat, also understood that the family's unity would be tested in the months and years to come. This wasn't just about the headlines, it was about the internal dynamics of the royal family. The Queen, while saddened by the revelation, knew that the family would need to come together in order to weather the storm. The monarchy, as an institution, had endured countless challenges over the years. This, she hoped, would be no different. Despite the initial shock, the royal family knew that they had to address the situation head-on. They could not afford to ignore it or let it fester. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions. In the coming weeks, a series of private meetings took place. Discussions were held behind closed doors, with the Queen, King Charles, William, and other senior members of the family coming together to decide how best to move forward. Would they publicly acknowledge the revelation, or would they attempt to downplay it? Would Harry remain a member of the royal family, or would this scandal force him into exile? The media, of course, was relentless. The press continued to run wild with speculation, offering endless analysis and commentary. Many royal experts weighed in, offering their opinions on what this meant for Harry's future. Would he be stripped of his royal titles? Would he be disowned by the family? Or would he be allowed to maintain his place within the monarchy, despite the revelation that James Hewitt was his biological father? In the public eye, Harry faced an uphill battle. His relationship with the royal family was already strained, and now, with this new revelation, the divide seemed to widen. The media, always eager for a new scandal, painted him as both a victim and a villain. On the one hand, he was seen as the son who had been denied the truth of his own parentage, a man who had been betrayed by his family. On the other hand, he was painted as the catalyst for the royal family's downfall, the one who had forced their secrets into the light. For Harry, the response from the royal family was just the beginning of a much larger journey. He knew that his relationship with King Charles would never be the same, and that the bond between him and William was now irrevocably altered. But even as the family struggled to come to terms with the revelation, Harry also realized something important. The truth had finally come out, and while it had caused pain, it had also given him the opportunity to redefine his own identity. The path ahead would not be easy, but Harry now had the chance to build a future that was truly his own. As the world reacted to the revelation that Prince Harry's biological father was not King Charles, but James Hewitt, the fallout extended far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. For Diana's close friends, the news was both a painful reminder of the past and a new chapter in the saga of the royal family's most enduring mysteries. These friends, who had stood by the late Princess Diana through her most challenging years, now found themselves grappling with the implications of the DNA test results and the public disclosure of a truth that had remained hidden for decades. Diana's closest confidants had always been aware of the speculation surrounding Harry's paternity. The affair between Diana and James Hewitt had been one of the most publicized scandals of the 1990s, and the rumors about Harry's parentage had persisted long after the affair ended. Despite the widespread gossip, Diana's friends had always been fiercely protective of her, choosing to remain silent on the subject. Now, with the truth finally revealed, those same friends were forced to reconcile the past with the present. Among Diana's closest friends was her longtime confidant and former butler, Paul Burrell. Burrell had been by Diana's side through some of her darkest moments, and their bond had remained strong even after her tragic death. When the DNA results came to light, Burrell, like many others, was left in a state of disbelief. He had known of the affair between Diana and Hewitt, and he had been aware of the rumors surrounding Harry's paternity. But the confirmation that Hewitt was indeed Harry's biological father still came as a shock. In interviews after the news broke, Burrell spoke with a mixture of sorrow and admiration for Harry's strength in the face of such a public scandal. "I can't imagine what he's going through," Burrell said. Harry was always Diana's greatest joy, and she adored him. To have this truth revealed so suddenly, I can only imagine the pain it must cause. Burrell's words were poignant, capturing the emotional toll that the revelation had taken on Harry, but also reflecting the deep love and connection that Diana had for her sons. Burrell made it clear that, regardless of the biological truth, Diana had always seen Harry as her own son, and that fact could never be taken away. Another of Diana's close friends, the designer and socialite, Anna Harvey, shared similar sentiments. Harvey had spent countless hours with Diana, both in public and in private, and had been one of the few people Diana confided in during the most difficult moments of her marriage to Prince Charles. Harvey had always maintained a strong bond with Diana's children, and she was deeply protective of their privacy. When asked about the DNA results, Harvey, like Burrell, was quick to point out that, despite the revelation, Harry was Diana's son in every meaningful sense of the word. "It doesn't matter what the DNA test says," Harvey said, speaking to the press. Diana loved Harry with all her heart. She was proud of him, and she always made sure he knew how much he meant to her. Whether or not he shares the same blood as Charles doesn't change the fact that Diana was his mother, and that's what matters most. These reactions, coming from those who had known Diana intimately, underscored the deep love and respect that Diana had for her children. Despite the scandal and the complexities of her own life, Diana had been a mother first and foremost. Her friends' reactions to the DNA test were an affirmation of the bond she had shared with her sons, particularly Harry. For them, the biological truth was secondary to the love Diana had shown for her children. But not all of Diana's friends were as sympathetic. Some, particularly those who had been less close to the princess in her final years, were more willing to entertain the idea that the truth could not be ignored. There was a certain faction of Diana's social circle that had always been more open about the affair with James Hewitt and the speculation about Harry's paternity. Some of these individuals, speaking off the record, suggested that the truth had always been known among those closest to Diana, even if it had been kept from the public. One such person was a former member of Diana's staff, who had worked for her during the early years of her marriage to Prince Charles. This individual, who requested to remain anonymous, claimed that the rumor about Harry's true paternity had been common knowledge among the royal household staff long before the DNA test results were made public. "We all knew," the source said. "It wasn't a secret, not really. The resemblance between Harry and James was too strong to ignore. But it was always something we kept quiet about, because that was the way Diana wanted it." For this former staff member, the revelation didn't come as a surprise, but it did stir up complex emotions. The idea that Diana's children, particularly Harry, had been living with a secret for so long seemed to resonate with those who had worked closely with the princess. Many wondered how much of Diana's life had been shaped by the need to hide the truth, and how much of that secrecy had affected her children. Some felt that the royal family had allowed Diana to live in a gilded cage, one that kept her from truly being herself, while others believed that the affair and the subsequent rumors had been a form of rebellion. A way for Diana to take control of her own narrative in a world that often sought to control her. Still, despite the divided opinions among Diana's friends, one thing was clear: the news of Harry's paternity was a painful reminder of the princess's tragic life and the complicated relationships that defined her time within the royal family. For those who had known Diana, the news was not just a scandal, it was a reflection of the complex and often painful dynamics that had existed within the royal household. The revelation that James Hewitt was Harry's biological father forced Diana's friends to reconsider the stories they had once told about her life, and the ways in which her personal struggles had been intertwined with the public image of the royal family. In the aftermath of the revelation, many of Diana's close friends also began to reflect on the legacy of the princess, particularly in relation to her children. Diana had always been a fiercely independent woman, unafraid to challenge the conventions of royal life. She had been a mother who put her children first, even in the face of personal turmoil. And for Harry, the new truth about his parentage was a painful reminder of the sacrifices his mother had made for him. For those who had known Diana, the revelation about Harry's biological father brought both closure and a renewed sense of grief. The secrets of the past, once hidden beneath layers of silence, were now exposed for the world to see. But even as the world learned the truth, those who had loved Diana remained steadfast in their belief that the essence of who Harry was could never be defined by blood alone. Harry's identity, they knew, had always been shaped by the love and care that Diana had given him, not by the paternity of his biological father. And so, as the media frenzy raged on and the royal family struggled to come to terms with the new reality, Diana's close friends offered a simple message: family, love, and loyalty were what truly defined Harry's place in the world. The truth, no matter how painful, could never change that. The revelation that James Hewitt was Prince Harry's biological father was more than just a shocking scandal. It was a seismic shift in the very foundation of Harry's identity. For years, Harry had lived his life under the public gaze, the weight of being a royal constantly pressing down on him. But now, with the truth revealed, he was forced to confront an entirely new reality, one where his identity was not just a matter of public perception, but a deeply personal question of who he was, where he came from, and how he would move forward. For much of his life, Harry had been defined by his royal status. As the son of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, Harry was born into a world of privilege and expectation. From the moment he entered the world, he was thrust into the spotlight, his every move scrutinized and analyzed. His identity was shaped by the royal family, by the titles he held, and by the public's perception of him as the second son, the heir to the throne. For a long time, Harry accepted this role, even if he never fully embraced it. He was the cheeky, rebellious royal, the one who would never be king, the one who was free to carve his own path within the constraints of the monarchy. But even as he carved out his own identity, Harry never truly escaped the shadow of the crown. The discovery that James Hewitt was his biological father threw this carefully constructed narrative into disarray. It was no longer just about being the son of Prince Charles, the heir to the throne. Harry's identity was now defined by the fact that his biological father was a man outside of the royal family. It was a revelation that changed everything: how he saw himself, how he viewed his family, and how the world would now view him. Harry had always believed that King Charles was his father in every sense of the word, but now that belief had been shattered. The emotional toll was immense, and the questions about his identity seemed endless. Who was Harry now, if not the son of King Charles? Was he still a member of the royal family, or had this revelation severed his ties to the institution for good? For years, Harry had struggled with his role within the monarchy. He had never been the heir, and his position as the spare had always felt secondary, as if he was constantly fighting for attention and purpose. But even with the struggles, he had always maintained a sense of pride in his royal heritage. Now, with the truth exposed, that sense of pride seemed fragile. The notion of being the son of King Charles, a symbol of the monarchy, had been an integral part of who Harry was. But with the DNA results in hand, that connection was now called into question. The question of his legitimacy within the royal family was not just about blood. It was about the narrative that had been built around him for years. Harry had been told from a young age that he was the son of Prince Charles, that he was part of the royal lineage that stretched back for centuries. That narrative had been reinforced by the public and the media, by the titles and the ceremonies, by the family traditions that defined the royal family. But now, that narrative was in jeopardy. The world would no longer see him as just the son of King Charles. He was now a figure who was not fully integrated into the royal bloodline, whose very identity was now subject to public scrutiny and debate. For Harry, this revelation was not just about biology, it was about the loss of something much deeper. The revelation forced him to reevaluate his entire relationship with the monarchy. Was he still a prince, even if his biological father was not the king? Was he still a member of the royal family, even if he no longer fit the traditional mold? For someone who had already distanced himself from the royal family, this new truth forced Harry to confront his position in a way he hadn't anticipated. The DNA test results didn't just change the way the world saw him, they changed the way he saw himself. The emotional journey that followed was tumultuous. Harry was torn between two worlds, the world he had always known, the world of royal privilege and duty, and the world that was now unfolding before him, one in which he had to question everything he had ever believed about his identity. His relationship with King Charles had been strained for years, but now it was more complicated than ever. How could Harry continue to view his father as the man who had raised him when the truth was that he wasn't his biological father? The bond between father and son was already fragile, and this new reality made it seem even more tenuous. As Harry grappled with these questions, he found himself turning inward, reflecting on his life, his past, and his future. Who was he, really, if not the son of King Charles? His role within the royal family had always been defined by the expectation that he would support his brother, Prince William, and fulfill royal duties without ever seeking the throne for himself. But now, Harry was forced to ask, what was his place in the royal family if the very foundation of his identity had been called into question? For much of his life, Harry had been searching for meaning, searching for a purpose that was not tied to the monarchy. His decision to step back from royal duties, his move to the United States, and his public statements about the royal family were all part of a larger effort to define himself outside of the royal narrative. But now, with the truth about his paternity revealed, Harry was forced to confront the fact that he could never fully escape the shadow of the royal family. His identity, for better or worse, would always be tied to the monarchy. Even if he walked away from the official duties and titles, he could never truly sever his ties to the family that had shaped his life. But in some ways, this was also a moment of freedom for Harry. The truth had been laid bare, and he no longer had to live in the shadow of secrets and speculation. The paternity test results, while painful, allowed Harry to redefine himself on his own terms. He was no longer just the spare, the second son, the one who would never be king. He was now a man who had the power to shape his own identity, free from the constraints of royal expectation. Harry's identity was no longer defined by his biological father or his royal title. It was defined by his actions, his beliefs, and the life he was now building with Meghan Markle and their children. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Harry was truly in control of his own narrative. He could choose who he wanted to be, free from the pressure of living up to a legacy that no longer felt like his own. As the months passed and the media frenzy began to subside, Harry continued to reflect on what it meant to be a royal, what it meant to be part of the family, and what it meant to be himself. The truth about his paternity had been a painful and difficult revelation, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one where he could forge his own identity, independent of the monarchy and the expectations that had defined him for so long. Harry's identity was no longer a simple matter of lineage or titles. It was about who he was as a person, what he stood for, and how he would continue to use his platform for good. The road ahead would not be without its challenges, but for Harry, the truth had set him free in a way he had never imagined. And in that freedom, he found the opportunity to truly define who he was and to live life on his own terms. The news that James Hewitt was confirmed as Prince Harry's biological father marked a dramatic turning point in the young royal's life. It was a revelation that not only shook the foundation of the royal family, but also dramatically altered the trajectory of Harry's own future. For a man already trying to carve out a life away from the monarchy, this discovery added a new layer of complexity to his already turbulent path. With the public's insatiable curiosity, media frenzy, and the dramatic implications for his relationship with the royal family, the question of what would happen to Prince Harry's future became all the more pressing. In the immediate aftermath of the DNA test results, there was no shortage of speculation about what the future held for Prince Harry. Would the monarchy strip him of his royal titles? Would he be disowned by his family? Or would he continue to carve a new path outside of the royal institution? These questions were hotly debated in the media, with some royal commentators predicting that Harry's future within the monarchy was now uncertain at best. But for Harry himself, the impact of this revelation went far beyond what the media or public expected. The discovery that James Hewitt was his biological father forced him to confront the deeper questions about his identity and place in the world. For much of his life, Harry had been content with his role as the second son, the heir to the throne. But now, the entire framework of who he thought he was shaken to its core. And it was this internal reckoning that would ultimately define the next phase of his life. The first major question Harry had to grapple with was his future within the royal family. For years, he had been at odds with the institution, often expressing his frustration with the pressures of royal life and the constraints it placed on him. He had taken several steps to distance himself from the monarchy in recent years, most notably when he and his wife, Meghan Markle, decided to step back from their roles as senior members of the royal family. Their move to California was an attempt to forge an independent life away from the stifling expectations of royal duty. The revelation about his paternity, however, complicated this effort even further. It added a new dimension to his relationship with the monarchy, and with it, the question of whether he could ever truly be free from the family that had defined his life for so long. In the wake of the revelation, Harry knew that his future within the monarchy was more tenuous than ever. There were already significant tensions between him and various members of the royal family, particularly with his father, King Charles. The DNA test results would only serve to further strain their already complicated relationship. Despite all the years of public service, charity work, and royal engagements, Harry now found himself at a crossroads where his place in the royal family was no longer certain. Would he continue to be seen as a member of the family, or would the revelation prompt the monarchy to distance itself from him even further? Harry's strained relationship with his father became one of the most significant factors in determining his future role within the royal family. For years, Harry had felt that his relationship with King Charles was distant and occasionally strained, particularly after the death of Princess Diana. While Harry had always maintained a certain respect for his father, the emotional distance between them had been apparent in their public interactions. This revelation only added more complexity to their relationship. King Charles, who had been a father figure to Harry in many ways, now faced the difficult task of coming to terms with the fact that his son's paternity was not what he had believed. While the royal family had long been marked by secrecy and a strict adherence to tradition, Harry's discovery now threatened to challenge those very foundations. As for Harry's relationship with Prince William, the implications were just as profound. The two brothers had long been seen as heirs to the throne, William, the future king, and Harry, the supportive second son. But now, Harry's paternity brought into question how the brothers would relate to each other moving forward. Would this revelation create a permanent rift between them? Or would they find a way to reconcile and move forward as a family? The pressures of being in the royal spotlight had always been a shared experience between the two brothers, but Harry's newfound understanding of his biological origins would undoubtedly alter their dynamic. As they both navigated their roles within the monarchy, the bond between them would be tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. For Harry, One of the most significant consequences of the DNA revelation was his relationship with his children, Archie and Lilibet. As a father, Harry was already grappling with the weight of being part of the royal family, and now, with this new truth, he had to come to terms with what legacy he wanted to pass on to his own children. Would he continue to uphold the traditions of the monarchy, or would he strive to offer them a life free from the constraints that had defined his own existence? The decision to step away from royal duties had already been a bold move, but with the truth of his parentage revealed, Harry was now faced with the responsibility of deciding what kind of future he wanted for his children. Would they grow up in the shadow of the monarchy, or would Harry work to ensure that they had the freedom to carve out their own path? Harry's relationship with Meghan Markle was another factor that would shape his future. Since their marriage, the couple had been vocal about their desire to live an independent life, free from the pressures of royal life. But with the DNA results now in the public eye, Harry was forced to reconsider what his future with Meghan would look like. The couple had already experienced the intense scrutiny of the media, and now, with this new revelation, they would find themselves at the center of an even bigger storm. How would Meghan react to the new truth about Harry's biological father? How would the couple navigate the public's fascination with their family? Their bond would undoubtedly be tested, but it was clear that Meghan would continue to be Harry's support system as he faced the aftermath of this life-altering revelation. In many ways, this moment marked a turning point in Harry's journey. It was no longer about being the royal second son, the spare. It was no longer about trying to fit into a mold that had been created for him. The truth about his parentage had set him on a path towards self-discovery, a journey that was entirely his own. The public, the media, and the royal family would continue to have their say, but Harry's future was now in his own hands. The journey ahead would not be without its challenges, but for the first time in his life, Harry had the chance to truly define who he was, free from the weight of royal expectations and public scrutiny. The impact of this revelation would also extend beyond the royal family. As a public figure, Harry had long been an advocate for mental health awareness, and now, with the truth of his paternity revealed, he had an even greater platform to